My phone buzzed at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I was standing in a closing room at Meridian Title, watching a young couple sign their names to a mortgage that would take them 30 years to pay off. And my father's caregiving app doesn't usually interrupt me during work. It's set to notify me only when there's motion in his kitchen after 5 o'clock, which is when his part-time aide leaves for the day. This was 13 minutes early. I glanced down anyway. Old habit. You don't spend 14 years processing property closings without learning that the thing you almost ignore is usually the thing that matters. The footage was still recording when I opened it. I could see my father, Walter, sitting at his kitchen table in the house I grew up in. 214 Larkspur Lane, the house with the crooked mailbox he refuses to let anyone fix because my mother painted it. Sitting across from him was my sister, Denise. She had a folder open, blue, with a rubber band around the outside, the kind we used to keep report cards in when we were kids. I turned the volume up under the table, in a room full of strangers signing away their futures, and I watched my sister slide a pen into our father's hand. "Just initial here, Dad," she said. "It's nothing new. You already agreed to this." He hadn't agreed to anything. I would know, because I talked to him every single day, and he had mentioned nothing about paperwork, nothing about a folder, nothing about a decision that involved the house my mother died in 11 years ago. I watched him hesitate. His hand hovered over the page the way it does now when he's tired, or confused, or both. Denise reached over and steadied his wrist, the way you'd guide a child's hand across a coloring page. "It's just a formality," she told him. "You won't even remember agreeing to this by dinner anyway." My hands went cold, not because of what she said to him, because of the calm, practiced way she said it, like she'd said it before, or rehearsed it, or simply believed it was true and didn't think it was cruel. I watched 11 minutes of footage sitting in that closing room, my professional face frozen in place while 3 strangers finished signing documents I'd stopped reading. 11 minutes. A folded document. And one sentence I would replay so many times over the next 6 days that I could recite it in my sleep before I ever had to say it out loud to another living soul. I didn't call my sister that night. I didn't call my father either. I called the one person who could tell me exactly what that folder was, exactly what it meant, and exactly how many days I had left before it became something I couldn't undo. But let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Patricia Holloway, and for 14 years I have worked as a title and escrow officer, which means I spend my days making sure that when a piece of property changes hands, it changes hands honestly. I check deeds. I check liens. I check the fine print that most people sign without reading, because somebody has to, and because I happen to be very, very good at it. I am 51 years old. I have been married to my husband, Mark, for 26 years. And we have 2 grown children, Sam, who is finishing his residency in Denver, and Lily, who teaches middle school science 40 minutes from where I live now. My life is not glamorous. It is most days wonderfully ordinary, and I have never once resented that. I live 9 minutes from my father's house. That distance matters more than it sounds like it should. 9 minutes means I can bring him his mail on the way to work. 9 minutes means I can be there in the time it takes to boil an egg if something goes wrong. 9 minutes has been, for the last 3 years since my mother passed, the exact distance between my father being alone and my father not being alone. My father is Walter Holloway. He is 79 years old, and he built the house at 214 Larkspur Lane with his own hands in 1974, back when the neighborhood was still mostly orchards and the road wasn't paved yet. He was a machinist for 31 years at a plant that closed down in the 90s, and he still keeps his old tools organized in a pegboard in the garage, each one outlined in faded marker so he'd know exactly where it belonged. His kitchen smells like coffee and old wood and, faintly, like the lemon oil he still uses on the same table he built the year I was born. That table has a burn mark near the left edge where my mother once set down a pan without a trivet, and my father never sanded it out. He said it was proof that people had lived there. He wears the same thing every Sunday morning, a flannel shirt, buttoned wrong at least once a month, and reading glasses pushed up into what's left of his white hair. He listens to the same AM radio station he's listened to since Nixon was president, and he still calls me Patty, which nobody else on earth is allowed to call me. His voice has gotten quieter in the last 2 years. Not weaker, exactly. Quieter, like he's saving his words for the things that matter. When he laughs now, which he still does, it comes out slower than it used to, like it has to travel a little further to reach the surface. I bring him groceries on Thursdays. I read him the newspaper on Sundays, the parts he asks for. The obituaries first, always. To see who I outlived this week, he jokes. And then the sports section, then whatever's left. I know the exact volume he likes the television at. I know he takes his coffee black until 11 in the morning and then switches to decaf. Because caffeine after 11 keeps him up, and being up at night means being alone with his thoughts about my mother, and none of us like that for him. My sister Denise is 2 years younger than me. We were close once, genuinely close, not the kind of close people perform for holiday photos. She was maid of honor at my wedding. I was there in the hospital room when her son was born. Denise moved 4 hours away for a marketing job in her 30s and never quite moved back. Not really, even after the marriage that came with the move ended 8 years later. She visits our father on holidays mostly. Birthdays when she remembers. She calls it being realistic about her bandwidth, which is a phrase I've heard her use in exactly that tone at least a dozen times over the years. Usually right before she asked me to cover something she didn't want to. I don't say any of this with bitterness. Not yet, anyway. Not in this part of the story. Everybody's family has a version of this arrangement, I used to tell myself. Someone lives close. Someone lives far. It isn't a referendum on who loves who. I believed that mostly for a long time. I believed it in February. I believed it even in the first week of March, when Denise called to say she was thinking about spending more time with Dad, given that things were getting to that age. I remember standing in my kitchen when she said that. I remember being glad. I remember thinking, finally, she's going to show up. My father's decline, if you could even call it that, has been slow and mostly gentle. He forgets the name of a neighbor sometimes and finds it 2 minutes later, embarrassed, snapping his fingers like the name is a moth he's chasing. He repeats a story he told me the week before, and I let him tell it again, because it's still a good story. And because I've read enough about aging to know that correcting someone mid-sentence does more harm than letting them finish. His doctor calls it mild cognitive impairment, the kind that comes with age and grief and living alone in a house too big for one person. Nothing alarming. Nothing that requires him to leave the house he built, or hand over his keys, or be spoken to like a child. Just enough of a change that I started keeping closer notes than I used to, which appointments he'd had, which medications, which days were sharper than others. I never imagined those notes would matter to anyone but me. 2 Sundays before any of this began, I sat across from him at that same kitchen table while he read me a headline from the paper about a scam targeting elderly homeowners 2 counties over. Someone posing as a city inspector, walking into a widow's home and walking out with her jewelry box. My father shook his head at it, the way he does at most modern cruelty, like it belonged to a world he didn't quite recognize anymore. People will do anything for money, he said, even to their own. I laughed a little, uneasily, and told him that was true in my line of work more than most people realized. I had no idea, sitting there with the coffee going cold between us, that he was about to become the exact kind of story he was reading to me. I had no idea yet what showing up was going to mean. The first thing I noticed was small enough that I almost didn't notice it at all. My father and I have shared a calendar for 2 years, a simple app. Nothing complicated where I track his doctor's appointments, his prescription refills, the dates his aide. A kind woman named Marisol comes to help him with things like bathing and laundry twice a week. In the second week of March, 3 appointments disappeared from that calendar without explanation. Not canceled. Deleted, along with the notes attached to them. When I asked my father about it, he looked confused. Denise said she'd handle scheduling from now on, he told me. Said it'd be easier on you. That's strange, I thought. Nobody asked if it would be easier on me. Nobody asked if I wanted it handled by someone else. I called Denise that evening, keeping my voice light, asking why she'd removed the appointments instead of just adding herself to the calendar alongside me. She laughed a little too quickly. You've been doing this for 3 years, Patricia. I just figured I'd take it over completely so you'd actually get a break for once. You're always so tightly wound about his schedule. I'm not tightly wound. I just like knowing what's happening. That's what I mean, she said. Let someone else carry it for a while. God, you make it so hard to help. I remember sitting with that phrase after we hung up. You make it so hard to help, turning it over the way you'd turn over a stone in your pocket, looking for the sharp edge you already suspected was there. It was a strange thing to be told, that my attentiveness was somehow an obstacle to my own father's care. But Denise has always had a gift for making generosity sound like an accusation when it's aimed back at her. I told myself it was generous. I told myself I was being small for feeling uneasy about my sister taking something off my plate. I let it go. The second thing happened 2 weeks later on a Thursday when I brought the groceries. My father mentioned almost in passing, while I was putting away his oatmeal, that Denise had found some old paperwork that needed updating. "What kind of paperwork, Dad?" He shrugged, the kind of shrug that used to mean I don't know, but now, more often, meant I can't quite hold on to the details. "House stuff. Denise said it's just cleaning things up, avoiding probate. She called it." I felt something shift in my chest, low and cold, the way I do at work when a number on a settlement statement doesn't reconcile, and I haven't found the error yet. But I know, with total certainty, that one exists. Avoiding probate. I have heard that phrase 100 times in my career. Sometimes it's exactly what it sounds like. A reasonable, well-executed estate plan. And sometimes it's the phrase people use to make a very specific, very consequential document sound like nothing at all. I asked him if I could see it. He said Denise had it. He said she was still working on it with somebody. "With who, Dad?" "Sandra?" He paused, the oatmeal box still in my hands, and I watched him search for the answer the way he searches for a neighbor's name, reaching for something that should have been easy and coming up a half-second short. "Some service," he said finally. "Denise found them. Said it's cheaper than a lawyer and just as good." Cheaper than a lawyer is a phrase that has cost more families more money than almost any other 4 words I've encountered in 14 years of this work. I know that because I've spent entire afternoons at Meridian untangling the damage those 4 words leave behind. Deeds prepared by unlicensed, document services that skip the very protections a real estate attorney would insist on, protections that exist precisely for moments like this one. I didn't push. I told myself that was the wrong instinct. My professional paranoia leaking into my family life, treating my sister like a stranger at a closing table instead of the person who used to braid my hair before school. I told myself I was overreacting. "You're not a title officer in this house, Patricia," I told myself. "You're a daughter. Let it go." I did not let it go for long. The third thing happened on the last Thursday of March, and this was the one that stopped feeling like small talk and started feeling like something with a shape. I was in my father's garage looking for a light bulb when I found a pamphlet in the recycling bin near his workbench. The kind of glossy trifold pamphlet that document preparation services leave behind. Printed with a stock photo of a smiling elderly couple and the words, "Simplify your estate, avoid the cost and delay of probate," across the top in friendly blue letters. Underneath it, torn in half, was an appointment confirmation. A mobile notary service. A date 9 days away. My father's name. Denise's phone number listed as the contact. I stood in that garage holding 2 pieces of torn paper, surrounded by my father's carefully labeled tools, each one outlined on the pegboard exactly where it belonged. And I thought about how nothing in that garage had moved an inch in 30 years without my father's permission. Something is being decided in this house, I thought, without me, and possibly without him either. I taped the 2 halves of the confirmation back together on his workbench, photographed it with my phone, and put both pieces back in the recycling bin exactly as I'd found them. My hands weren't quite steady doing it. I remember thinking that was an odd thing to notice about yourself, the specific, physical steadiness of your own hands. But I have learned since then that the body keeps a kind of ledger the mind is often too slow to catch up to. That night I called Marisol, my father's aide, and asked, carefully because I didn't want to put her in an awkward position, whether she'd noticed anything different lately. "Your sister's been coming by more," Marisol said. "Mostly in the mornings. She asks me to run to the store sometimes, little errands, while she visits with your dad. I didn't think much of it. Family time, you know? Does she ever ask you to leave when she's showing him something? Paperwork or anything like that?" There was a pause on the line, longer than I expected. "Now that you mention it, yeah. Twice, maybe 3 times. She said it was private stuff, financial things." I figured that was normal. Families keep money things between themselves. Mornings, I thought. My father's best hours. The hours before his afternoon medication made the edges of the day go soft. Denise had never once in 3 years come to a Sunday dinner without being reminded twice. And yet somehow she had found her way, without any reminders at all, to the exact hours my father was at his sharpest to look at, and the exact hours he was at his weakest to sign. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay next to Mark, staring at the ceiling, running through every professional instinct I had, trying to talk myself out of the shape the evidence was starting to take. You process closings for a living, I told myself. You are trained to see fraud in every folder. Not every family conversation is a scheme. Denise is your sister. She held your hand at Mom's funeral. But I kept coming back to the torn appointment confirmation. 9 days, a notary. A folder my father hadn't seen in full, being prepared by someone who wasn't him. The following Monday, I did something I had never done in 3 years of caring for my father. I installed a small camera on top of his refrigerator, angled toward the kitchen table, the same table with the burn mark near the edge. I told myself, and I told him, that it was because I was worried about a stranger. There had been a string of scams targeting elderly homeowners in the county. I'd seen 3 fraudulent deed transfers cross my own desk at work that quarter alone, each one involving someone posing as a helpful relative or a home repair contractor. I told my father it was for his protection against people who might take advantage of him. I meant every word of that. I simply had the wrong person in mind. The notification came on a Tuesday, 13 minutes before Marisol's shift usually ended, and I have already told you what I saw when I opened it. But I didn't tell you everything, because the moment deserves to be told slowly, the way it happened to me. One detail at a time, each one landing before the next one arrived. I sat in that closing room at Meridian Title with 3 strangers signing a 30-year mortgage in front of me, and I watched my sister open a blue folder on my father's kitchen table. I recognized the folder before I recognized what was inside it, because Denise has carried folders like that since she was in middle school, organized, color-coded, a habit our mother used to praise her for. The document inside was 2 pages. I couldn't read the text from the footage, not clearly, but I didn't need to. I've spent 14 years staring at documents exactly like it. I recognized the header at the top of the first page the way you recognize a stranger's face if you've seen 10,000 photographs of people who look almost exactly like them. It was a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed. I thought, sitting perfectly still while a young couple beside me signed away 30 years of their lives to a bank, is the single most dangerous document you can hand to a vulnerable homeowner, and almost nobody outside my profession knows why. A quitclaim deed doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't warrant that the property is free of debt, free of liens, free of complications. It simply transfers whatever interest the signer has, good or bad, clean or encumbered, to whoever's name goes on the new deed. People use it between family members all the time for legitimate reasons, and people also use it, quietly, to take partial ownership of a house from someone who doesn't fully understand what they're signing. Because unlike a will, a quitclaim deed doesn't wait for a funeral to take effect. If my father signed that page, Denise wouldn't have to wait for anything. She would own a piece of the house at 214 Larkspur Lane the moment the ink dried and the deed recorded at the county office. The house my father built with his own hands. The house my mother died in. The house with the crooked mailbox nobody's allowed to fix. And if Denise later needed money, sold her portion to a stranger, took out a loan against it, forced a partition sale through the courts, my father would have no recourse at all. None. A quitclaim deed offers 0 protection to the person who signs it. It is not a mistake you get to quietly correct later. It is a mistake you discover only when it is already recorded, stamped, and real. I watched my father hesitate over the pen. I watched Denise steady his wrist. "It's just a formality," she said again, the same practiced calm. "You won't even remember agreeing to this by dinner anyway." I checked the timestamp on the footage. 4:41 p.m. My father takes his afternoon medication at 3:30 p.m. every day, medication that, by his doctor's own notes from a checkup 6 weeks earlier, mildly affects his short-term memory and processing for roughly 2 to 3 hours afterward. Denise had scheduled this conversation, whether she understood the mechanism or simply understood the pattern. For the exact window of the day, my father is least equipped to fully understand what's in front of him. My hands went cold, watching that. Not metaphorically. I looked down at them on the closing table, and they had actually gone pale at the knuckles, gripping the edge of a stranger's mortgage documents like they belonged to me. I watched my father sign his initials on the first page, His hand shook slightly, the pen dragging a little at the end of the stroke, the way it does now on cold mornings or long days. Denise didn't seem to notice or didn't seem to care. She kept her hand resting lightly on his wrist the entire time, not gripping, just present. The way you'd steady a child's bicycle without them quite realizing you were still holding on. I watched her close the folder, smile, and say, "See? That wasn't so bad," in the exact tone you'd use with a child who just finished a vegetable they didn't want to eat. My father nodded slowly, the way he does when he's agreeing to something mostly to end a conversation rather than because he's certain of it. "Is that everything, then?" he asked her. "Almost," Denise said. "Frank still has to come make it official. Just a formality after this. You did the hard part." There was no hard part, I thought, watching from a closing room 40 minutes away, surrounded by strangers finishing a mortgage on a house I'd never see. There was no hard part because you made sure of that. You made sure the hardest thing he'd have to do was hold a pen. Then I watched her check her phone, and I heard her say, almost to herself, almost too quiet for the camera to catch, but not quite, "Frank's coming next Thursday to finalize it." Frank. A name. A notary, presumably, already booked, already scheduled. Exactly like the torn confirmation I'd found in the recycling bin weeks earlier. 9 days had become 6. I sat with that number for a long moment before I let myself move again. 6 days is not very much time to unwind something that had clearly taken weeks to build. The calendar, the mornings, the document service, the folder. 6 days is barely enough time to schedule a single appointment of your own, let alone stop someone else's. But 6 days? I told myself, sitting rigid in a chair that wasn't mine, in a building full of paperwork that wasn't mine either, was still 6 more days than my father would have had if I hadn't been watching at all. I sat through the rest of that closing on autopilot. I signed where I needed to sign, initialed where I needed to initial, shook hands with 3 strangers whose names I could not have told you 5 minutes later. I drove to the parking garage, sat in my car with the engine off, and watched all 11 minutes again from the beginning, this time with a legal pad on my lap, writing down every timestamp, every phrase, every detail I would need. "You know exactly what this is," I told myself, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I let myself believe it completely. "You have processed 1,000 deeds. You know what undue influence looks like when it's dressed up as helping." I thought about calling my father right then. I thought about driving straight to Larkspur Lane and putting the phone in his hand and making him watch it. I didn't do either of those things, because I also knew, with the same certainty I bring to my job every single day, that confronting Denise with nothing but outrage would accomplish nothing except giving her 6 days to rewrite the story before Frank ever arrived. Aradat 5, the preparation. I did not call my sister that night or the next. I called Rosa Kim instead, a colleague of mine who runs the fraud and title defect desk at Meridian, someone I've worked beside for 11 years and trust completely. I told her everything, the calendar, the pamphlet, the torn confirmation, the 11 minutes of footage, the medication timing, the name Frank. Rosa didn't tell me to calm down. She didn't tell me I was overreacting, the way some small, tired part of me half expected her to. She listened all the way through without interrupting once, and when I finished, she asked only one question. "Do you have the footage saved somewhere other than that app? Somewhere it can't be deleted remotely?" I hadn't thought of that. I downloaded 3 separate copies that night, one on my laptop, one on an external drive Mark keeps in his desk for his own work files, and one emailed to myself at an account Denise had never known existed. It felt almost absurd, backing up 11 minutes of kitchen table footage like it was a legal filing. It also felt, for the first time in weeks, like I was finally doing something with my hands instead of just carrying the weight of it in my chest. Rosa pulled up her laptop right there in the break room and said, "Let's figure out who Frank is." It took less than 20 minutes. Frank Delgado, licensed notary public, operating a small mobile notary business called Sunrise Signing Services, active license, no disciplinary history. A completely ordinary, completely legitimate notary, which mattered more to me than almost anything else in that moment, because it meant the person standing between my father and that deed was someone bound by law, not someone Denise had handpicked to look the other way. Here is what most people don't know, and what I know because it is, quite literally, My job, a notary public in this state, has both the right and the obligation to refuse to notarize a signature if they have reasonable concern that the signer does not understand the document, is being coerced, or lacks the mental capacity to consent freely. It isn't optional. It isn't a courtesy. It's the law, and it exists precisely for moments like the one that was coming for my father on a Thursday afternoon in a kitchen with a burn mark on the table. I did not confront Denise. I did not raise my voice to anyone. I have spent 14 years learning that the person who reacts first is usually the person who loses the ability to control what happens next, and I was not going to lose control of this. Over the following 4 days, I did 4 things, methodically, one at a time. First, I contacted my father's actual estate attorney, a woman named Sandra Ortiz who had drafted his will 11 years ago, shortly after my mother passed. I sent her the footage, the time-stamped notes from my legal pad, and my father's most recent medical record showing the documented cognitive effects of his afternoon medication. Sandra watched the footage while I stayed on the phone, and I heard her go quiet in a way that told me everything before she said a word. "This isn't an estate plan," she finally said. "This is somebody trying to get ahead of one. No quitclaim deed of this kind has ever crossed my desk for your father, and he's never once mentioned wanting to change how the house is held. If anything, he told me 11 years ago he wanted it to stay exactly as it was until he decided otherwise, on his own terms." Sandra offered to come to the house herself that Thursday, but I asked her to hold off. I didn't want a lawyer's presence to be the thing that tipped Denise off before the notary ever arrived. I wanted the system already built into the process, the one designed to protect people exactly like my father, to be the thing that stopped this instead of a family argument that Denise could later reframe however she wanted. Second, I contacted Frank Delgado directly, not to accuse him of anything. He had done nothing wrong, and I wanted to keep it that way. I explained calmly and factually, over a 15-minute phone call, that I had documented concerns about my father's capacity to understand the document he was being asked to sign, and about the circumstances under which the signing had been arranged. I sent him nothing but the facts, no accusations, no speculation about my sister's character. Under his professional obligations, that was enough. "I appreciate you telling me this," he said. "Concerns like this get raised more often than people think, and I take every one of them seriously. I always conduct my capacity interview alone with the signer regardless. It's standard practice, but I'll make sure I'm especially thorough given what you've shared." Third, I quietly asked Marisol if she would be willing, if it ever became necessary, to describe honestly what she had observed over the past several weeks, the mornings Denise asked her to run errands, the timing of the visits. I told her she wasn't obligated to say anything at all, that I didn't want her caught in the middle of a family conflict that wasn't hers. Marisol didn't hesitate. "I like your father very much," she told me. "He's kind to me every single day, and kindness like that deserves protecting. I'll tell the truth if anyone asks me." Fourth, I did not tell Denise anything at all. I let the 6 days pass exactly as she believed they would, with her folder, her plan, and her Thursday appointment fully intact in her mind. It was, I'll admit, one of the harder things I've ever done, sitting across from my sister at a family barbecue 4 days before Frank's appointment, listening to her talk about her upcoming vacation, and saying nothing at all about the 11 minutes of footage sitting on 3 separate devices in my house. This is the part that should feel satisfying, I told myself, sitting in my kitchen on the night before Frank's appointment, because you are finally doing something. And it did feel satisfying, but not in the way I expected. It didn't feel like anger cooling into a weapon. It felt like relief. The particular, specific relief of watching a chaotic file finally organize itself into a clean, defensible sequence of facts. I went to bed that night thinking about my father's tools, each one outlined on the pegboard exactly where it belonged. I understood finally what I was doing. I wasn't preparing an ambush. I was simply making sure that when Thursday came, the truth would already be standing in the room before anyone had the chance to talk around it. Bonintrin D, Act 6. The resolution. Thursday arrived warm and ordinary, the kind of early April afternoon where the light through my father's kitchen window turns everything gold by 4 o'clock. I arrived at 214 Larkspur Lane at 3:15, before Denise, and told my father the truth, not the accusation. Just the plain facts, the same way I'd have explained a title defect to a nervous first-time buyer. I showed him the footage. I watched his face change slowly, the way water changes temperature, not all at once. "I signed something," he said quietly. "I remember signing something. I didn't understand what it was." "I know, Dad," I said. "That's exactly why I'm here." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine, the same table with the burn mark near the edge, and he didn't say anything else for a long moment. He didn't need to. Denise arrived at 3:52, 8 minutes ahead of Frank, carrying the blue folder with the rubber band, and stopped in the doorway when she saw me sitting at the table beside our father. "What is this?" she asked, and I watched her eyes move from me to Dad, to the folder in her own hands, doing the same fast arithmetic I do every day at work when a closing starts to fall apart. "This is me being here for the signing," I said. "Same as you." "You weren't invited." "I don't need to be invited to protect Dad's house, Denise." "I never did." Frank arrived at 4 now exactly, professional and unhurried, carrying his notary stamp and a leather folio. He greeted everyone politely, and then he did exactly what his training required him to do. Exactly what I knew he would do. Exactly what the law obligated him to do, regardless of who was in the room, or how uncomfortable it made anyone feel. He asked to speak with my father alone. Denise objected immediately. "That's not necessary, he's fine. I can explain the document to him." "Ma'am," Frank said, calm and unbothered. "It's standard procedure. It'll only take a few minutes." I watched something flicker across my sister's face in that moment. Not guilt, exactly, not yet. Something closer to recalculation. She had built a plan around a version of our father who wouldn't be asked direct questions without her steadying his wrist, and that plan hadn't accounted for a professional stranger insisting, gently but immovably, on doing his job correctly. They spoke for 6 minutes in the living room while Denise and I sat in silence at the kitchen table, the folder between us like something radioactive. "You always said I'd get the house anyway," Denise said finally, quiet, almost to herself. "You have your own place. Mark makes good money. I have nothing, Patricia. I've had nothing since the divorce." "That's not what this is," I said. "This is a document that would have taken partial ownership of Dad's house without him fully understanding what he signed. At exactly the hour of the day you knew he'd understand at least. You're twisting it." "I have 11 minutes of footage, Denise." "I'm not twisting anything." She didn't have a response to that. For the first time since I'd known her, I watched my sister run out of a version of events to offer. Frank returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, my father beside him, and set his folio down on the table without opening it. "I'm not able to notarize this document today," Frank said plainly to the whole room. "Based on my conversation with Mr. Holloway, I don't believe he has a clear understanding of what he'd be signing, or of the consequences involved. I'd recommend he discuss this with his own attorney before any transfer of this kind moves forward." "This is ridiculous," Denise said. "He's my father. I know what's best for him." I stood up then, not with anger, but with the same steady clarity I use every day at a closing table when I have to tell someone, kindly but without room for negotiation, that a deal cannot proceed as written. "Paperwork is the only reason you can't lie about this anymore," I told her. "Not because I said so, because it's documented and it's true, and both of those things now exist whether you like it or not." My father spoke for the first time in several minutes, quiet but entirely clear. "I want Sandra to look at this. My Sandra. Not anybody else's." Frank gathered his folio without opening it, and for a moment nobody in that kitchen moved. My father sat very still, looking down at his own hands on the table, the same hands that had shaken slightly over that pen 6 days earlier. "I'm sorry, Walter," Denise said finally, and for one strange second I thought she might actually mean it. "I really was just trying to help you get things in order." "I know you believe that," my father said, quiet but entirely steady. "I don't think that makes it right." Denise turned to me then, and something in her face shifted. Not softening exactly, more like a door closing somewhere behind her eyes. "You've been planning this for days," she said. "The camera. The lawyer. You let me walk in here." "I let the truth walk in here," I said. "You're the one who brought the folder." She picked up her purse from the counter, slower than she needed to, the blue folder still tucked under her arm with the rubber band still wrapped around it. Undisturbed, exactly as it had been when she arrived. Frank thanked my father quietly for his time, shook his hand, and let himself out first, giving the rest of us the kind of privacy a stranger instinctively knows how to offer. Denise lingered by the door for a moment longer. "This isn't over," she said, though I don't think even she was sure what she meant by it. "It is for the deed," I told her. "What happens between us now is a different question. That one's actually up to you." She didn't answer. She left the house 11 minutes later, blue folder still in hand, without the signature she'd come for. I sat back down across from my father, and for a while neither of us said anything at all. He reached over and set his hand on top of mine, the way he had earlier that afternoon, and this time he left it there until his coffee had gone cold. The consequences that followed were not dramatic, and I've come to understand that they didn't need to be. The quitclaim deed was never notarized, never recorded, and therefore never legally existed as anything more than 2 pages in a folder. Sandra Ortiz reviewed the situation the following week and helped my father set up a proper revocable trust instead, one with built-in safeguards requiring a second family, members sign off on any future property transfer, and a standing instruction that no legal document involving the house could be prepared without her office's direct involvement. My father removed Denise as a secondary contact on his accounts and his medical records within the month, not out of spite, but because he told me plainly, "I don't think I can trust her judgment about what's good for me anymore, and I'd rather know that now than find out later." Denise did not go to jail. No criminal charges were filed, and I never wanted them to be. What she attempted was exploitation, not the kind of crime a prosecutor pursues against a first-time offender who is also someone's daughter. But the documentation exists permanently now. The footage, Frank's written notation of his refusal, Sandra's file. If Denise ever tries again, there is a paper trail that makes a second attempt significantly harder to disguise as innocent help. Family reactions split roughly the way these things do. My aunt, my father's younger sister, called Denise dramatic for making a scene over just a formality, which told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly Denise had rehearsed that phrase before she ever said it to our father in the first place. She said it to me directly at a cousin's graduation party 3 weeks later, and I simply told her she was welcome to review the footage herself before forming an opinion. She didn't take me up on it, and she hasn't repeated the phrase since. 2 of my cousins, though, reached out privately in the weeks that followed to tell me they'd seen Denise attempt something similar, years earlier, with their own grandmother's savings account, a joint account request that had been quietly refused by a suspicious bank teller, a story nobody in the family had ever fully connected until mine gave them a reason to. Neither of them had said anything at the time because, as one of them put it, nobody asked, and it felt like accusing someone of something you couldn't quite prove. I understood that hesitation more than I wanted to. I had felt it myself for 3 straight weeks before the footage made the choice for me. Marisol still comes twice a week. She mentioned a month or so later that Denise had called her once to ask what she'd told me. Not angry, just probing, fishing for how much I actually knew before Thursday ever arrived. Marisol told her the truth, the same way she'd promised she would, and Denise never asked again. My father still takes his coffee black until 11, decaf after. The burn mark is still on the table. Denise and I speak occasionally now, carefully, mostly about logistics. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were before that Tuesday at 4:47 p.m. I've made peace with the possibility that we won't be, because I've learned something in the last month that I didn't fully understand before. Being needed is not the same as being valued. And my father needed protecting more than our relationship needed preserving at any cost. I still visit every Thursday with the groceries. I still read him the obituaries first, so he can see who he's outlived that week, and then the sports section, and then whatever's left. His hand doesn't shake anymore when he reaches for his coffee cup. Not because anything about his health has changed, but because, I think, some quiet part of him finally feels safe enough to be steady again. The trust Sandra drew up was finalized in early May, and my father asked of his own accord for a copy to be kept in a fireproof box in his closet alongside my mother's old jewelry. The same box, he told me, where he'd once kept the deed to the house when he first built it in 1974. He wanted to know exactly where it was at all times. I understood that instinct completely. It is, in its own way, the same instinct that made me install a camera above his refrigerator in the first place. A few weeks ago, sitting at that same kitchen table, he looked at me and said, "You didn't have to do all that, you know. The camera. The lawyer. All of it." "Yes, I did, Dad." He nodded slowly, the way he does now when something settles into place for him. "Your mother would have done exactly what you did," he said. "She kept records on everything. Drove me crazy sometimes, all those folders and dates. Turned out to be the smartest thing she ever did." I laughed, because it was true, and because it was the first time in weeks that laughing about any of this had felt entirely safe. Keeping records isn't paranoia when the people around you keep rewriting the truth. Helping is a choice, not a debt someone else gets to collect on your behalf. And love, even between sisters, does not entitle anyone to a signature they didn't earn honestly. I installed that camera to catch a stranger. What it caught instead taught me that sometimes the person you least expect to need watching is exactly the person standing closest to the people you love, and that protecting them doesn't require rage. It only requires paying attention and being willing, when the moment finally comes, to stand quietly in the room and let the truth speak for itself.